And of course, we have the constitutional provision where section 25, which gives freedom of religion, provides practice in religion, is also found in the Constitution. Whether that read along with Article 53, which empowers the Parliament to make special provisions with regard to women and children. Equality principle of Article 14. Men and women, there cannot be a discrimination on the basis of sex or religion. And of course, Article 21, which encompasses everything under the sun, which is life in the earth. Now, do we have to have a relook on this issue? Now, since we've advanced, we have scientific advancement of nature. Now we are sending something to the sun, further to the sun. We've already gone to Moon and Mars. So whether this change over the years in thinking, in scientific improvement, in the society going forward with many other aspects, will this also be or can be interfered with by the courts of law? Will be another aspect which we will be discussing about. And of course, we are now talking about secularism, equality, and empowerment of women. Now, if by just saying Talaq tracks over your WhatsApp, Skype, or SMS, would it end a marriage contract? Now, if you see the criminal law, the section 125, which be the worst of the legal aspects of here. That's what I'm talking. So, 125, the Criminal Procedure Code, that is with regard to interim measure avenue. Now, what happened was, in Japan's case, when the question arose, the Supreme Court said yes, everything can be paid. And it should be because the women have to be taken care of. But then there was a law brought in by the then government, to nullify that decision. Because somebody says it was the election year, so they had to bring that law to become more popular. That's another question that has to be answered. Now, of course, the present government has brought in this passed a bill, put a bill to again give alimony to, because 125. See, the difference is now there are two domains. One is under the criminal law, the other is the civil law. The civil law aspect we were talking about. So under the criminal law, there is no distinction. I mean, it could be a Muslim woman or a Hindu or anything else. So she is entitled to so much of money. Now that 500 rupees, which was the cap as of about already being removed in 2001. So any amount of money can be given as alimony. And as the United States things are wrong. So the question, ultimate question will be whether there should be a common civil code to equate men and women, women of different religions and sects. So therefore, the ultimate question to answer is whether a common civil code, if it falls under this public domain, whether a common civil code can come in and nullify this the rigorous rigor of Talaq. So therefore, I would now with that small introduction or making long introduction, we leave it to the analysts. So I would request Mother Sayeed, and you heard she was also a member of the State Assembly. She should say what kind of laws would be brought to interfere or change or modify or amend this practice of Talaq, which could have useful to come.
We need a microphone down. I don't need it here. Good morning to everyone. It has a background subject. We're going to talk about triple talaq, but I would like to say much is made of Islam being a bad religion. I don't know. This might not come from mullas and maulanas and people like us who are interpreting it. So I would say extremely inability to interpret it right. That's cause common sense. Otherwise, I'm not preaching for my religion, but I think it's all man-made. Each one brings out and have maulanas and other maulvis, so-called religious heads, and they change shirts. They want to change their women also, which they are objecting. That's all. Women suddenly open up, become a leg. That's another problem. Nobody wants us to do because such a patriarchal mindset is wrong in every field. It's not just this Muslim law. Everywhere there is patriarchy. But that's a different question. What I do want to say is that the Supreme Court has banned you know so much myself and friends from law.
And even that is wrong in the community. They say, how can you refer to all that? But they can give whatever fatwas they want. Fatwas are decrees, by the way. Whatever. Like I can't sit in Pondicherry and speak here. That will be one fatwa against me tomorrow. But that's okay. We're not bothered anymore. We've outgrown everything now. Anyway, this is what the Supreme Court held. It's unconstitutional, it's irreligious, it's un-Islamic. So what more do we want? Then what happened? The people said that's enough. It's not enough. We've got that. But suppose a man again goes and marries again and for a second time. Okay, polygamy is also allowed. And he gives this triple talaq. Who's going to correct him? Nobody knows. The woman doesn't know anything. And all that we can be very happy and proud that Supreme Court said that's banned. But how do you bring into effect that ban? And therefore we need legislation. And therefore the government brought this bill in Parliament, which passed in the Lok Sabha because of their numbers. But when it came to the Rajya Sabha, opposition, election time, as you rightly said, sir, it's election time, and how can we, tell the Muslims that, no, we are bringing a law. Actually, you're not doing anything great. But that also stalled. But now that law has also been watered down. Earlier, a few months ago, it was very tough, and we did not know who's going to complain. In that law, there was punishment, and there was jail term. So everybody had a hue and cry, the whole community, saying that, oh my God, now all the Muslim men are going to be sent to jail. I said, it's good for a while, to sit in the cooler and come back. Now, what's wrong with that? Because we are always having trouble. So let our partners also have a little trouble. My husband is sitting here. So I shouldn't be saying this. He's right there. Anyway, so that's what. So that law is perfectly all right. And the next thing I heard is when I said that, they said, I'm a Modi Bhakt. I said, call me what you want. Let's not throw the baby and the bath water out. Let's take that law and let's see what happens. But unfortunately, again, it's diluted. It's quite watered down. The amendments have been carried out. We've all written to the Prime Minister. So I think better sense prevailed and it happened. But they never let it pass again. So what I want to say is, there is triple talaq is still there. It's being practiced with impunity. Impunity is being practiced by our men because they don't care. And also, they don't even need to give the talaq. They can marry another time. So next step, beyond triple talaq, the next step we are moving is towards polygamy. That should also be abolished because it's not part of any religious book. It never says that you must marry 4 times. It says you shall not drink, but we're all drinking happily. But it never said that, you should not, you should marry 4 times. There's no such thing. However, we interpret it according to our thing. So therefore, beyond triple talaq, I would say we need to abolish polygamy and we need to abolish this famous halala, they say. I saw it on the TV one day, which has made me feel very ashamed. That is, the wife, when you get divorced, you can't get remarried again without getting divorced, marrying another man and whatever. So, 2, 3 men are going to have fun at that poor woman. So that's the law, they say, but it's totally wrong. It's absolutely wrong. They're in denial of certain things. And the Muslim Personal Law Board, which you all must have seen on TV and heard about, is totally patriarchal. What they want is control over women, nothing else. And therefore, all this tamasha is going on. But I believe that that law will come into Parliament and that will be passed sooner than later. And we will have a law. Now, that is the codification. Everyone talks about codification. What is it? That will be codified. That they will say, who's going to give a complaint? What happens when you marry 4 times? What happens when you give this instant talaq? The whole thing will be there. So what else you want? You're crying on one side for codification, the other side, and then we come to this uniform civil code. Therefore, what I want to say is that polygamy, beyond triple talaq is all this. Halala, polygamy, so many other things that come into the way of this. After this, all this flows from it. Therefore, all the rights also flow. You know what I mean? Some people say, no, politically there is so much tyranny. I said, I don't care about it, but I care about the social tyranny. Look at what's happening to us socially, you know.
So this is the part of the topic which is beyond triple talaq.
It's okay if I say that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe in 2 minutes because they
I'll
may
finish it in 2 minutes.
You'll have another round.
Okay. Therefore, what is happening today is that we are waiting for the bill to pass and for triple talaq to be abolished through the law, not through not this going to jail business. There's a lot of hue and cry on that. But I think even for bigamy, people go to jail, right? There are so many laws which put us in jail. So why not a few days even for this law, you know, to go to jail? Maybe then we'll learn what it's all about. Anyway, before all this happened, this triple talaq, I also pleaded myself in the Supreme Court. Before that, you know, the Madras High Court passed injunction. I had filed a PIL where I said, you know, the Qazis, again our religious heads, self-styled, they thought that they have to interfere in all this, and therefore they used to validate this talaq. If a woman got divorced, husband sent the triple talaq and she didn't know whether she was coming or going, so they would go to the Qazi and get it validated, which was assuming large proportions. Therefore, I filed a PL in the High Court of Madras, where the judge held that, that's wrong, because the powers of the Qazi are very limited. They have no administrative or they have no judicial powers. Therefore, they can't do it. Therefore, that injunction came first and then moved the Supreme Court. Supreme Court is the last bastion and it's coming to our rescue every day. So beyond triple talaq will be all this. We need all these things to happen, which I'm sure, yes, step by step it will happen. And so I would say, once you have those laws, why do you want a uniform civil code? What is that uniform civil code? We are afraid by, oh, they'll interfere. When the Supreme Court will not interfere, it will work within the parameters of the Holy Book, within the parameters of what we are saying. And if they pass these laws and amended or tweak the law or whatever you want to call it, so then you're not afraid of the uniform civil code, right?
Yeah. So what you're saying is there is no need for a uniform civil code, because what the courts ultimately say is the law of the land. It's not necessarily should be put in the form of a statute, a written form, but a judgment is as much as a law as a statute enacted by the parliament. That is what probably you're saying. Of course, because we have one more topic, that 377. You would like to say something on this, Mrs. Smita, Barooah?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here today.
In 5 minutes, please.
Yeah, I'll just keep it short, because when the organizers told me to be a part of the 377 and triple talaq panel, I said, but I'm a counselor and my field of work is addiction. So what do you want me to talk about? Because there are experts here. And the organizers said they wanted me to focus on the mental health aspect of this. And that's what I will do. For triple talaq, I will keep it short and we will go to 377 when that topic comes up. As a therapist, I deal with couples, I deal with divorces, and no matter what the circumstances, even in the most amicable cases, divorce is traumatic, especially for the woman, because, you know, very often the women are not as financially sound as the male counterparts. There's depression, there's low self-esteem, there is a huge loss of identity. Who am I? Where do I go from here? And this is under the best case scenarios. So triple talaq for me, as a therapist, is unjust to the woman. And therefore, I completely support you in your fight here. Because, according to the 2011 census, for instance, 13.5% of Muslim women were married before the age of 15. 49% were married between 14 and 19 years. So think of these young women when they are thrown out with a talaq, talaq, talaq. How financially secure are they? How much education do they have? What skills do they have to navigate the world outside? So unless there is some legal redressal for these women, some protection, you're literally throwing them out on the street with no recourse. There have been a lot of crazy arguments to support the continuation of the system, because obviously the male has the dominant power here. he's doing as he pleases, and taking away powers is never a happy situation. So one of the most ridiculous arguments I've heard is, well, if you jail the men, then who's going to look after the women? Well, hello, you've thrown her out in the first place anyway. You weren't going to look after her anyway, so what are you even talking about? The second argument that I've heard is, well, if you jail the man, a lot of the communities live in ghettos, and they're going to ostracize the woman and her family, and they're going to throw her out in the street anyway. The counter-argument is, maybe you will ostracize the woman when, the law is implemented, but for the first time, all this while, it was the woman who was bearing the brunt of the talaq. Now, even the man has a share. So there is a consequence for the behavior of the man for the first time. And that, for me, is justice. And beyond that, I think there are enough experts to talk about the legal aspects. I hand it over to Abhijit.
Yeah, Mr. Abhijit.
Let me just get my talking points up. Yeah. Okay. So, I'm going to keep this short again because I much prefer to and fro later on and leave time for that. But, I just want to bring out that when we're looking at the entire 377 debate, I'm not going to rehash it for you because that's already been spoken about, is how you look at homosexuality in India, how it's seen in the West, and how it's seen in the Middle East. And in India, what happens is mostly, for most of my friends, what's happened is every time they've gone and told their parents, Amma, I'm gay or something like that, it's usually, that's fine, beta. We always knew that. Get married, have kids, and what you do on the side is your own business. The second thing is when they're adamant that they will not marry and so on and so forth, some of them get used to it, and some of them then cut them out of the will and so on and so forth. Sad to say, unfortunately, at least in my limited, I have not done any proper methodological this thing, but within my friend circle has been that they usually accept it, get married, ruin the woman's life, ruin everybody else's life in the process. And that becomes a problem. In the West, it's been very different. The West has always been pretty much, the Christian West has been quite intolerant of it. And however, it was always kind of accepted at some level till it starts getting codified, sometimes depending on the country between 1500s and 1600s, where you have outright illegalization of homosexuality. And it's really bizarre because the Ottoman Empire actually legalized homosexuality sometime in 1870 something, and Russia, Tsarist Russia, banned homosexuality 3 or 4 years after the Ottoman Empire legalized homosexuality. So, it's a very bizarre social construct, the way this thing goes. But then this brings us to Muslim societies. And in most Muslim societies I've been to, Syria or Iran or something like that, there is a huge difference between the word of the law and the practice, the social practice of it. Because I've never come across two societies more socially tolerant towards homosexuality than, say, Syria or Iran. You go to the hammams of Damascus, it's better than any Grindr or Tinder you can ever come across. And in Tehran, usually the pickup line is, are you married? That is the segue. And the thing is, you don't have legal protections. So what happens is every time the government decides, in Iran especially, they have these periodic crackdowns. They'll decide dogs are unclean, therefore people can't walk their pets in public. Homosexuality is illegal, therefore we're going to kill a few homosexuals every 5 to 7 years, kind of cyclic routine to set an example. So you have to understand the various social aspects to this when we get into the legislative angle. Now, how do you there is the whole human rights issue, which I'm extremely uncomfortable about because I don't believe in human rights. That's a completely different aspect that we can talk about later. But for me, the justification has always been in terms of, if you do it in terms of a social good, it's how does it justify itself in the economy? Is it economically good? Because economics, ultimately, the wealth of society is how you decide what a social good is. Now, in a pre-industrial society, in an agrarian society, you need people to conform. It's very important, right? Your continuation is based, your property rights, the wealth you've created for your family, because pre-industrial societies are violent societies. It depends on numbers. You require people to reproduce and so on and so forth. And they tend to be a lot less permissive about things like homosexuality that don't reproduce. On the other hand, and I'm going to club this with a whole thing of gender identification and so on and so forth, transgender rights, in a post-industrial information society, not recognizing dissent. For a man with a beard to go wear a sari to work and say, well, I'm a woman, I may have been born Krishna, but now you're going to call me Lakshmi, and I will turn up to work with a beard because I'm very comfortable wearing a beard with my sari. Why are you concerned about it? At one point of time, there was the aspect of social control. But in most Western societies, people have learned self-control. You're not a pre-industrial society where it's an eye for an eye. He killed me and therefore I want some justice to happen to him, that sort of vindictive thing. So what happens is that what is necessary for a pre-industrial society becomes completely counterproductive in a post-industrial information society. And this then, I'm just going to end now with, this brings us to the Uniform Civil Code. Now, this is what I find really strange, is that we have never industrialized. And we want to leapfrog to the information age, right? But here's the point. If you want to leapfrog to the information age, the best enabling legal system for it is to allow polygamy, polyandry, polyamory, cisgender rights, transgender rights in the workplace. And on the other hand, you haven't even gone through industrialization. And if you want the discipline that comes from sustained industrialization, where people learn to restrict themselves and outsource the law enforcement function to the state and learn restraint, it takes 200-300 years to learn that. You actually need a much more restrictive legal framework. So I'll leave it at that.
The aspect of Uniform Civil Code came in more because, as you know, Article 44 of the Constitution says there shall be a Uniform Civil Code. That, of course, part of the directive principles, not the fundamental rights. It's in Part 4 of the Constitution, which the state should strive to achieve. So therefore, this aspect of course, Supreme Court decisions are sufficient if it stands. You know, sometimes, you know, they collateral damage, sometimes, you know, what they call, you know, one particular case they decided about issues regarding the other matters which were not before the court at that point of time, and that's probably, it is helping 377 case as well, because in Justice Puttaswamy's case, they said this falls under the right of privacy, which is the overruling the earlier Correct Singh's case, MP Sharma's case. So now they said it's not in the public domain. Two adults having sex by consent, it's in the private realm. Nobody can interfere. So, and not even the law. So, of course, what was filed by the Nas Foundation in 2001 before the Delhi High Court came up for judgment before Justice A.P. Shah and Justice Muralidhar. In 2009, they passed the judgment saying that is decriminalizing that portion of it, reading it down. They could not strike down the law. They read it down and said ultimately, of course, maybe the parliament can think of passing a law on that. Then when it came up, of course, number of impleading petitions, then review petition, then a curative petition, the others joined in. Of course, the Supreme Court, in a division bench, two judges bench, they said that the Suresh Kumar Kaul's case, where they said, no, it's not for the court to interfere. Court cannot amend the law. Court does not make the law. So it's for the parliament. It's left to the parliament to decide what to do. Of course, then in this Justice Puttaswamy's case, what happened was when they were deciding over the aspect of privacy, the law of privacy, right to privacy, which is now read into Article 19, which is your fundamental rights, part of the fundamental rights. Now they say you cannot interfere. Now they have almost said that. There is a large bench which has said that. Now, obviously, what is going to be decided is it's so clear that as we read it, 377 will be probably struck down, and that portion of it which criminalizes adult sex between same sex. So that is what is going to most likely happen. And So with this, she wanted to say about 377. We'll have about 15 minutes at least, or 20 minutes for discussion. That is your open house questions.
Thank you. 377 is an issue that is close to my heart. As I said, I'm a mental health therapist, and most of my work has been in Singapore. And while we were debating 377 here, Singapore has also been debating. They have a similar clause, that is 377A, which decriminalizes homosexuality. And unlike India, their case has already been decided for now, because Lee Hsien Loong, the Prime Minister then, said, the current Prime Minister, he said, while we accept that this is a Victorian concept that has been imposed on us, now it has become a case of social values. And although society is changing, it hasn't changed sufficiently for people to embrace this new idea. And therefore, they continue with 377A. As an Indian, I'm very proud to say the debate that we have seen around this issue is very robust, and I'm very hopeful about the outcome in court. And for me, as I said, it's personal because in Singapore, by default, I ended up working with a lot of clients who were from the LGBT community. It's a very small community, and it's a very close-knit community. So through word of mouth, if somebody, they find a therapist, they refer it to a lot of other people. And a few of the cases that stick with me, because I wish to illustrate the human aspect. When you criminalize something, you stigmatize it, you shame an entire community for their private choices. And it has huge ramifications. For instance, I had a man, a Muslim guy, who came because he was suicidal. That is the stated problem. But why is he suicidal? Because he's in this relationship which is difficult. And for any of us, relationship difficulties are the most heartbreaking thing that you can deal with. But for him, it was compounded by the fact that he can't tell anybody about it in his family because he'll be, excommunicated, literally. So he has a family thing, he has to be undercover, and yet he's grappling with it. So that was one case that I dealt with. The other case is this person whose parents are church missionaries. So there is low self-esteem, there is guilt, there is shame, there is this whole gender confusion. Is the church right or am I right? Is my choice right or is what my parents telling me right? So there is a whole, and that person chose to cope by abusing drugs. Because when there is trauma and when there is, such great confusion, many people choose to self-medicate. And to me, therefore, decriminalizing 377 is about justice. Because the minute you stigmatize a community based on myths, and I use the word myths because a lot of the pushback that is happening in the debates is because a lot of people have misconceptions. One of the misconceptions, for instance, is gay men molest children. So if you, allow free rein to the gays, then there will be pedophilia everywhere. But that's bunkum because there's studies after studies. The American Psychological Association has stated that children are not more likely to be molested by LGBT parents. Also, it dumbs down the idea of pedophilia because pedophiliacs are of two kinds. You have the fixated variety who are not attracted to adults of any gender, male, woman, man or woman. They like children, both boys and girls. Then there is the regressive pedophile who prefers adults, but the adult is not available and there is some kind of a stress, then they will prey on children. And that could be men or women. And studies have shown that the regressives are often heterosexual men. So that's one myth busted. The second thing is, well, it's, it's bad parenting that leads to homosexuality. There's some trauma or some dysfunction in the family. Well, the reality is, again, this is not stuff that I'm making up. These are based on studies across the world. People do not choose their sexuality. It is not a case of bad parenting. It is something that is, it's epigenetic. So that is the second myth. The third thing is that if we, legalize homosexuality, we will somehow end up legalizing bestiality and, all these other strange things. So conflating these issues is problematic because bestiality is a different genre altogether. So, but all these myths come because, and if you're, homosexuality is a choice and therefore you can somehow cure it. So there are these evangelical groups in the US, for instance, who say, okay, come to us and we do this whole therapy and then when you go out, a gay man goes out straight. which is nonsense. There are in fact lots of studies which have shown that some of these preachers themselves have then come out of the closet and said, oops, sorry, mistake ho gaya ji. Actually, I am also a homosexual in denial. So it is this whole pressure, social pressure, which has made a lot of people go, deny their original core. And that is unfortunate. And along, when we get rid of the law, along with it, we also have to work on the social aspects and debunk all these myths. They have to go hand in hand because there is a lot of fear.
Take on from there. So what happens is, now see what we're doing in this panel is we're discussing these topics like bestiality and pedophilia, which if you actually go through the last set of 377 hearings in the Supreme Court, most of the visible members of the gay community were offended that these issues were even being raised. And this is highly problematic because when you have a problem, you sit out in the open and you talk about it. Now, what the 377 is a catch-all. It is not just an anti-gay legislation. It bans a whole set of behavior, including pedophilia and bestiality. Of course, we've got POSCO, I think, to deal with child abuse separately. But still, so for example, if a gay male today gets raped by another male, other than the law of natural assault, unlike a woman who has a rape law, because that Nirbhaya law was made gender specific, theoretically a man can't be raped today, right? So 377 then becomes the protection for against homosexual rape at that point. But when you're reading down a law, and we're not getting rid of 377, and there seems to be a lot of confusion even within the LGBT community about this, because you'll always see the hashtag 377 must go. 377 isn't going anywhere, it's just being read down. In the reading down, you need to be very, very careful. You have to specify, because when you say consensual, now you or me, average educated people in this room, we can understand that consensual fundamentally rules out rape. So male rape can still come under 377. It rules out bestiality and kids because kids cannot give consent. But you try this with a local cop. 4 years back, we were drafting some kind of a media regulatory bill for the previous government, for the UPA government. And we came up with very, very simple language, 1.5 pages, of which the actual legal wording was just about 3 or 4 lines, and the rest was explanations. And our test of it was to convert it to Hindi as well and go to every single police station within a 3-kilometer radius and ask the police guy there, sir, do you understand this? Almost nobody was able to understand that law, even though we avoided all this extremely complicated hereof, herewith, thereof, thereforth language. And in spite of that, they could not understand how this law had to be applied, because that is the caliber of your cops that happens, that you end up hiring. Now, of course, it's a different matter that when we sent that bill back, the legislator, the minister in question, he turned it into a 21-page document with such intensely verbose English that even I can't understand it. So that's a different matter. But I'd just like to end quickly with the point that you brought up, which was, damn, I forgot now. What was the point you brought up? That it's a choice, right. Now, the thing here is that we sometimes get the 377 arguments that have been happening. She listed out all the studies that have come out telling you why homosexuality leads to bestiality, homosexuality leads to pedophilia, la-di-da, have been busted, and they're completely unscientific. And yet, what you find right now, and this is the human rights argument in the 377 case in the Supreme Court, is you're having random attacks on homosexuals being passed off as a pattern. Now, this is very dangerous because it is the same random homosexual who's also indulged in bestiality, or random homosexual who's also indulged in pedophilia, that's used to come out, concoct these stories about homosexuality being bestiality, homosexuality being pedophilia. And yet this is the exact kind of quack statistics which the anti-377 LGBT arguments in the Supreme Court are going with. And that's very dangerous because you can't have a decriminalization based on quack statistics that can then easily be turned against you and used to recriminalize you. And you know, when in 2013, when the Supreme Court struck down the Delhi High Court judgment, those judges were actually, if you read the transcripts of the hearing, they were extremely pro-LGBT. They wanted to legalize it. The problem was the arguments were so contrived. You cannot create a random pattern where clearly none exists. So there's a great danger with the way the case is being argued right now. And I'd really urge all of you who want to learn more about it and the dangers of it to go through the transcripts, and we can talk about that in the Q&A session.
Can you just say on that?
Yeah.
2 minutes? Okay.
Sure, sure. Before that, I just wanted to say this 377 is part of the penal code, which was, enacted in 1860, Macaulay and the others. It was based on the Buggery Act of England. The knowledge what they had about these aspects were very different at that point of time. Now, one of the arguments which was raised before Supreme Court was that HIV will spread and people will go underground doing these things. Now, this is precisely what the Supreme Court is now taking to its own advantage and saying. Now, it should be open. I mean, it should be recognized so that, and you decriminalize it so it is done in the open, and people will be, the law can control whatever the bad aspects which they've raised earlier in the case. The other thing is, as Mr. Barooah pointed out, it's not by choice. Now we learn from science, it's not by choice. It's a person is born with that kind of mental and physical makeup. So it is, of course, the other aspects rolled out, rape. That's why we said between adults, consensual adults, it can happen. The other aspects of the law stands. Rape and whatever else. That's why they've just ruled it down, or diluted the criminalized part of the whole section. Now the problem again arose was what the stand of the government was. Again, it's an election year which is going to come. They have to decide. See how politics and thinking by some people could delay the whole process, or maybe hasten it. So now, in fact, when the government was opposing earlier, they suddenly changed their stand and said, ultimately they said, now we leave it to the wisdom of the court. Now, what does the court do? We always say when we write good judgments, it is more because of the lawyers. They have come up with very good arguments, they have cited good cases, the facts they could explain to us clearly. As judges, we could write an excellent judgment. Of course, we do some research as well. But generally, we say, look, if our judgment is good, it's substantially your contribution. Now, the government said, hands off. We leave it to the court. The wisdom of the court. Now, the court has to do all the research. They'll have to see what are the other laws which are prevailing in the other countries. Now, what are the bad and good aspects of it? What happens if it stays? What happens if it doesn't stay, or if it is read down? Even countries like, you'll be surprised when I was reading some materials on this. Belize, some of you may not even know where it is. It's a Central American country. Belize, Mozambique, East African countries like Mozambique, Seychelles, they've recognized gay rights. And why in this country we are still thinking about it and then leaving it to the Supreme Court to decide? Supreme Court can decide either way. That's one danger. I mean, it can, like it decided that Kaushal's case, it decided otherwise, because whatever was presented before the Supreme Court was not sufficient to convince the Supreme Court to turn it down or read it down. Ultimately, it is left to the Parliament to change the law. That's what they said. So, with this in mind, of course, probably we'll be later asking you what are your doubts, but sure, you can take more than that because we have sufficient time. Last half an hour for our discussion.
What I want to say is, the topic is that also beyond 377. So it's not just that the sexual minorities in our country need only decriminalization, but they also, their rights and all their protections, all that also has to be examined. It may be a larger question, and people may be afraid that there will be right to inheritance and there will be right to marriage, everything that flows for any citizen. They're going to ask for it, and rightly so. So as he also said, it's not just enough that you decriminalize it. They're still susceptible to all kinds of problems. Therefore, the court will have to examine positively what are those rights that will flow from it, so that they are part of the mainstream. It's no more, that, okay, all right, we've given you this order. But then even the police won't know about it. No, we never read about it. In the law, they'll start off on that, So I think they need to have their rights also protected. And, I just want to tell you one thing. In Kerala, I heard that the government is even giving them grants or whatever, loan or whatever, to have their sex change operation, which I think is fantastic that the Kerala government is doing that. So they're helping them in every way. It's not just that it's going to stop at decriminalization. After that, all these rights, everything should flow. And even that right to privacy judgment also says that it needs to be done. You can't just say, okay, we don't know what they're arguing in the Supreme Court, then we stop there. Then where do these guys go? I would say back to square one, because they have no other rights after that. Therefore, all these rights must flow. Therefore, there cannot be a different set of citizens and a different set of laws. No, they have to be part of the mainstream, and the courts, state, I don't know, right? Today, I don't know what the state wants to do. They're very afraid because there are lots of, problems with radicals and religious heads and what have you. So I don't think they're going to come to the court and say, yes, you must also look at those rights. As our judge here rightly said, they don't want all that. Even this 377 being abolished, I think, is a big issue for them. But however, I'm sure, I believe that the court will strike it down. I believe that though the earlier Supreme Court said whatever it said, but I think it will be struck down, and I hope it will be. But after that, we have to work. The next thing we work at is their rights. So beyond 377, what happens? We've got to see that they get all their rights under the Constitution. There's no more. That is what the gender injustice will be if we don't get that, So I was very impressed with the Kerala government saying this, and they have made reservations and all kinds of, forums for these people, which I thought was really impressive. I wish everyone would do that. Thank you.
I'd just like to make one.
Yeah, sure.
Just one other thing beyond the legislation. One of the things that as citizens we need to then, talk to people about is that homosexuality is not a mental illness. For long, people have been stigmatized, saying, oh, you're, okay, fine, we accept you, be kind to you, we'll show pity, but there is something wrong mentally. And the Indian Psychiatric Society has openly come out and said it is not a mental disorder. The American Psychiatric Association for long has been saying that. But even in India now, all the associations are saying that. So unfortunately, when there is a change of this magnitude, it takes some time to trickle down and to sink in. But hopefully, at least with the educated people who are aware, this message needs to be drummed in again and again.
So I just wanted to add to what Madam Badasai said. The country that subsidizes a sex change operation to 80% out of state funds is Iran. Iran lets you have sex change operations. It's the sex change capital of the Middle East. And they subsidize, the state will subsidize your sex change operation up to 80%. They protect the rights of, they vigorously protect the rights of people that have had sex change operations. And this brings me to my second point, which is post-decriminalization care depends on your police. Because, in India, the police is so bad that no matter what, they will find something to harass you on. You show me the man, I will show you the way to get 50 or 100 rupees out of you. So, for example, this gentleman sitting with a blue lapel thing, I will find something that says wearing a blue lapel pin is illegal in Pondicherry. He's done nothing, but I will go after him just to get my 100 rupees out of him. Now, it's cheap, but I'm just using a generic example. But the fun thing here, sorry, it's not the fun thing, the serious thing here is that police reforms are very, very important to reduce the harassment, because even if you decriminalize, the harassment of of the entire LGBT community, especially hijras, for example, will continue till you start controlling the police. And one of the things that happens in Iran, which we don't realize, is in 1979, before the revolution, they were more industrialized than South Korea, Taiwan. They had a higher per capita. They had achieved that level of industrialization. And industrial society dynamics are different. One of the noted things about an industrial society is the control it has over its police discipline, their willingness to understand issues, apply principles, and do things properly, which still continues, even though their per capita income is reduced to 1/3 of what it was. You still have that framework and training system where they invest in cops, train them up very, very well. 3 months in a year, they've got to go for training courses and things like that. So, you know, we also need to, post 377, you will continue to see cases like this till you invest seriously in police training. I won't even go so far as to say police reforms, because that seems to be politically dead duck out here. Nobody's going to touch it. But invest in your police, keep teaching them about things, sensitize them to things.
This, 377 reads like this. Of course, I have the entire section, but then part of it which concerns us is, it reads like this: carnal intercourse against the order of nature. Now, what is, as Mrs. Barooah had pointed out, it's not against nature. Now we realize scientifically that it is part of one's nature. The thinking, the mental orientation is very different. Now, this was, as I said, this law itself was based on the Buggery Act, which is of 1533. You know, you can imagine how far we have traveled down the line in scientific terms as to what science has read, people's mind, how it thinks, and so many aspects like that. So the other aspect which was very important, which you all pointed out, was what do you do? Oh, let's now assume for a moment that the Supreme Court decriminalizes 377. You know, he doesn't leave it to the government, because the government says, in your wisdom, you decide. Now, most likely, as we all read, most likely, as you all must be thinking, because a larger bench of 9 judges, now they have said clearly this falls under the private realm, and law cannot be like a peeping Tom. So it's almost said, the Supreme Court has almost very clearly said that it can't last. 377 has to be decriminalized in that sense. So the other bench is not obviously going to decide otherwise. I mean, it can't. I mean, that's judicial propriety. Now, what do you do after the judgment comes out? As you said, maybe what you must have said is 100 francs. Maybe not 100 rupees. 100 rupees is very cheap. 100 francs are dollars, which is close to 70 rupees now per dollar. Now, see, that is another, that's probably what you mean by beyond 377 and these aspects. How do you get it down to the people to understand, the police, the investigating agencies, the law enforcing agencies, the executives? Because, I mean, I was professor of law for about 16 years, part-time professor at the law college there. I was to teach constitutional law. I used to, in a lighter vein, of course, we had such great regard for Justice Krishna Iyer. Whenever I go, that's why I'll go meet him. You know his flowery language, Justice Krishna Iyer's judgments. I used to, in the class, we used to say, look, first of all, it's so difficult for you to find out what is obiter, dicta, and ratio. You know, ratio is what is binding, and the obiter is what the court discusses, side by side, and it comes to a conclusion which is enforceable as part of the law, which is the ratio. And I also used to tell them, if you want to pass the exams, just for the exam's sake, don't read like authors like Sirvai. Sirvai, of course, enhances your knowledge tremendously because he gives different aspects of things. He analyzes, he gives his own opinion, he gives the academic opinion. whole lot of things. But then the professors won't understand. These are, so when it is so difficult for even legally trained people to understand, now how do you take it down to the, let's say, the policeman, the last man on the street who catches your collar and shakes you up and say, what the hell are you doing? Now how do you explain to him, no, look at that judgment, what it says. How does it decriminalize homosexuality? And what is homosexuality? What is those technical aspects are so difficult for these people to understand. Now that will be the challenge. Probably now it's almost settled. I mean, from my view, I'm sure most of you are thinking the same way. It's almost settled that the Supreme Court is going to do that. It'll hit it down. Now, in fact, there are 5 million transgenders. I read recently. Imagine all the other groups put together. It'll be a huge number. Number-wise, this is what is found. But there are so many people who might not have declared themselves to be or openly said, yes, no, hashtag, I, so and so. Also part of it. But now, how do you, take it down to the people, take it down to the law enforcing agencies? That will be a huge challenge. Not so much Supreme Court. I think it's a foregone conclusion that it's what the result is going to be. But how do you enforce it on the field? That I'm sure many NGOs and other people many of you should take it down to the people, explain, have seminars like this, or your workshops, lit fests. Even though a lot of people are making noise outside, we don't know what they understood or what they didn't understand. So anyway, more noise that is made, more publicity, and probably this will be richer, and the next time you will discuss even more controversial things. So this is just the start. So can we leave it open to the audience? Please, you can answer your lady first. We'll have half an hour for that. So you can specifically, just question. Don't, we are told the moderator is supposed to stop them. We are going to give a lecture. You're not going to give a lecture on it. Specific questions to specific, panelists. Yeah. And your name and just...
I am Sushri Swagatika. I have come from Department of English, Pondicherry University. My question is to Madam Barooah.
Don't ask questions to the moderator.
Ma'am, as a therapist, you must have also come across this issue that if patriarchy is the reason behind all these problems, the pressure of masculinity or the pressure of mardangi is also affecting the males a lot. We have been branding males who are benevolent or have soft qualities or tend to show, their qualities of being bisexual or homosexual at a tender age. We become safe by branding them deviants and criminals. So what do you think? What constitutes masculinity? What should we teach our boys to be?
Gosh, that's a very big question. What constitutes masculinity? That I think is an individual, but yes, I would not say it's patriarchy per se, but the social norms. I mean, you've been fed the tall, dark, handsome, macho image from Mills and Boons and all your movies and all the literature that you read. So that becomes the prototype of the typical male. And your question is that anyone who deviates from that prototype, then they get labeled, right? The solution for that again is as a society evolves, these are things that will change organically. When we become more accepting, because we are at a very nascent stage, as Abhijit says, we are talking the way where our society is, there are multiple layers, right? We are talking far ahead of what a lot of people are able to process. So even decriminalizing something is such a big issue. So talking about the nuances, where is masculinity, what should it be, a very, higher evolved communication. But that to me will change only when people grow, when the society changes, and that's always a slow process. And that's not something you can sledgehammer it, right? Because stereotypes sink in many ways, and it's reinforced through many channels, within the family, through the media, through the literature. And evolution is about eroding that out slowly and changing a new, way of thinking. Does that answer your question?
If you are thinking something like this, if the nation wants to know, ask Alexa, the Google Assistant. Don't ask where is he. Now, this probably is beyond the part, yes, beyond 377 and that. Good question.
Hello.
Shall we go row-wise? Maybe here, no, row-wise. Anybody? You had? Yeah. We'll go row-wise, if you don't mind. Yeah. That'll be easier. So that first row, if you're done, then we can go to the second row.
It's okay.
In 30 seconds. Question should be 30 seconds.
To Mr. Abhijit. Actually, the question is regarding section 370. The question is regarding section 377. Section 377 is not confined to homosexuality. It is also like if a straight man has a kind of oral sex with a woman, it's also criminalized. But there is no kind of awareness among among most of the Indians that even without being aware of what they are doing, even like for example, if I have such thing, if I have an oral sex with a woman, it is also a part of, I'm also a criminal. But most of us do not have an awareness about it, and we think that 377 is only about homosexuality, and even the people who present themselves as straight men and women, they do not appeal for it. So how could we make the changes in the society to create awareness about it? The awareness about the legal framework, and how could that be done? And this is one question, and I have another question for ma'am. Actually, the question is regarding this Muslim personal law. When it was constituted in 1973, as far as I have read, there were many voices coming that the cases that come under Muslim personal law or any other personal law should be judged by the judges who represent that community. Like for example, if a case comes from Muslim personal law, that it has to be judged only by the the judges who are Muslims, the practicing Muslims. So is that, like, for example, if we keep on, if we don't go for a uniform civil law, and if we keep on clinging to these personal law books like Hindu personal law or Muslim personal law, and these demands keep coming in, so it is completely against, it's completely against the idea of secularism that is enshrined in the constitution. So what is the, how can we handle it? So these are the two questions. Thank you.
So the thing is, the answer to your question is it's never actually been a problem. When was the last time you heard of anyone that got arrested for cunnilingus or fellatio? The thing is, this actually works in, this is one less problem, and we'd rather not discuss it, because the same untrained cops that we're talking about don't even know that these two heterosexual acts come under the definition of 377. So I'd much rather keep it that way and not spread any kind of awareness about it, because I think judicial pendency is way too high. We don't need more things added to it.
And what you asked me was whether we need Muslim judges to give judgments on Muslim. Yeah. No, but right now there is no such thing as Muslim judges hearing Muslim cases or Hindu judges. Judges are judges. They are not, they read up the law. They do so much research on it that, they pass judgments on a Muslim law also or on Hindu law. So why do we need those? Then it will become like, we have the Muslim Personal Law Board. We don't want that. Or they're talking of Sharia courts. That's what it will amount to. And we don't want that.
In fact, I think there's in the newspaper, you must have seen some Hindu court one lady has been appointed as a Hindu judge. These are, once you become a judge, then you are supposed to be absolutely impartial. So that's it. So,
that's of course more confusing. Muslim judges only for Muslim.
Yourself? Yeah.
So I have two questions. One is for Alice.
Okay.
I'm really interested in your comments, which I've read also in other places, on the Uniform Civil Code, sort of de-emphasizing the need for the Uniform Civil Code and talking about the value of judgments and other processes for codification that really act as, de facto, perhaps creating a certain kind of uniformity. So I'm sort of curious about that because I wonder if that makes the process a lot more ad hoc. And then putting that together with your comments here about the role of law in drawing people and creating a certain mainstream body of practices and so on, how do those two kind of reconcile? I mean, can you really rely on these legal judgments and extrajudicial, perhaps, processes of codification to create that sort of uniformity? So, how do you reconcile those two is one question. Could I just ask the second one as well? The second one is for Abhijit, Iyer, Mitra. I've been taken by this idea that you talk about leapfrogging. And I think you, from pre-industrial to post-industrial societies. And you didn't mention it in your talk this morning, but I sort of, I'm guessing that you alluded to that in the contrast between, the need to focus on people rather than technology and use of technology as I'm taking it a sort of method of leapfrogging. So, and then you use this phrase, which perhaps I hope I got it right, about learning the state. I'm curious to hear you say more about that. So what does this process of leapfrogging actually entail, and what is this learning the state?
I didn't get exactly what you wanted me to, what is it that you want to know?
So,
I talked about uniform code and I talked about bringing in legislations.
Yes, so if you talk about legislation versus the uniform civil code is very political hot topic. And how do the two get reconciled? Are you sort of saying that we don't need any more uniform?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. We don't need it.
Then does the process not become very ad hoc? How do we bring about that sort of uniformity? How do we talk about actually bringing these ideas, practices, people, etc. into the mainstream without having that body of law, which is just produced through legal judgments as they come?
No, we bring in legislation also. Like the judgment has come of the Supreme Court, but that's not enough. Judgments are not enough. Then they move to legislation. So once you answer the problems of the Muslim community through that legislation, then it's good enough. We don't need a uniform civil code. I don't know if I've answered your question.
Yeah, just to add to that, yes? Probably, a judgment finally is the law. But most likely, there may be a direction from the Supreme Court based on the judgment that the Parliament should pass a law. Probably that's what's going to happen.
But you're talking about how does that, even if legislation came?
I guess my larger question is, are there alternative paths? Is that what you're really getting at? Are there alternative paths to the uniform civil code?
Absolutely, absolutely. I don't want to say it because then I would be in trouble with my community. I'm always saying this, that this is what we need first. And then we'll talk about the Uniform Civil Code. And besides, I'm always saying, let's call that bluff of whichever government is sitting there. Come on, why don't you draft a Uniform Civil Code and give it to the community, to various communities, and let's see what they throw up. But isn't that a political thing, that Uniform Civil Code is only that? At every level, every election, what happens? We are threatened with that. We are provoked with that. That, we'll bring this. So I am one who says, yes, please bring it, But definitely, as you use that word alternative, yes, if that law, if a legislation comes in for Muslims and Muslim women can benefit from that, why not? We can rely on that. It's as good as a code.
Mr. Abhijit?
So leapfrogging is really more of a mental state. Unfortunately, in the Indian policy discourse, you hear it as an economic argument where they say we're a pre-industrial services society and suddenly we're just going to forget all about the capitalization required for industrialization and double down on services. Now, if you remember, this is what happened. This was China versus Russia. In 1990, after the collapse of 91, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia was in a much better place to reindustrialize itself and focus on industry. And China required a lot more money to do it. Yet China went the industrialization path, Russia took the services path, and we can both see exactly where they are. So what you hear in the policy discourse in this country about leapfrogging physical manufacturing industrialization is complete moonshine. It is anthropological rubbish. It is scientific rubbish. It can never happen. So when you see an economic thinker tell you that they're going to leapfrog into the information age, you know that the entire economic thing that he or she is writing about is completely bogus. What it actually involves, what I'm talking about, is the mental evolution. Because when you're industrializing, industrialization is an extremely brutal process. People don't realize this, but more people died in early 1700s in England than died under Stalin's purges. 1/4 of the population was lost. And people don't realize this, that it was mostly because of the pressures of early intense industrialization that happened. The French Revolution happened because of, uneven distribution. Industrialization sees to it that surpluses get concentrated on the top, and the weakest people are just left to die in a sense in that, right? It happens in different ways. In Britain, it was a lot more democratic. In the Soviet Union, it was much more brutal, compressed into a short phase, which is why you see it as being much more traumatic. It's traumatic irrespective. But what happens is the mental change. Over 200, 300 years, you then stop. In India, for example, if you don't get your way in a land dispute, you're like, let me hire some goons to go beat up that woman who's squatting on my land, and so on and so forth. You'll hear Indians very casually in the public discourse talk about how the military should take over, how we should, just say, give the middle finger to judges and do whatever. You'll never hear that in the Western public discourse, because mentally they've just attuned themselves to, we follow the laws, we leave it to the state, and so on and so forth. So it's huge. I mean, I'm just giving you a very frivolous, small example. We can go into it in great detail over lunch if you want later.
So what we'll do is we'll ask one question, 15 seconds, and then we'll also answer briefly, so that because we'll have to, by 1 o'clock we'll have to close. Article 14.
Hello. A very good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jolly Ghosh, and I'm pursuing the degree of Masters in Sociology from Pondicherry University. My question is to Madam Barooah. There are two couples, one heterosexual couple and one homosexual couple. And how will you juxtapose how they will socialize or nurture their children? What would be the difference between the socialization and the way they nurture their children? Thank you.
So that is a relevant question, because that's one of the big fear factors that is brought out the minute you talk about homosexuality or the right of LGBT couples to adopt or have children. There have been studies in America, there have been studies in Australia, these are like serious studies, which show that there is really no difference, because a child that is being brought up, what does a child need? He needs security, he needs time, he needs proper nurturing. There is no guarantee that your heterosexual couples give that. Over and over again, we hear about child abuse. These are not from homosexual couples. These are from heterosexual families. We hear about incest. Who's doing the incest? It is not your homosexual couple who's doing that, right? So these are myths that need to be busted. There are studies which have taken on this topic. Maybe you might want to read up more on what are the findings, but so far there is no proof that one is better than the other, because eventually the only thing that the child needs is security and love. And that is not gender dependent.
A small question. How do we reach out to the rural part of India after striking down 377? Because hashtag movements cannot flow to the rural part of the nation. And educating the police won't help them. So they are opinion leaders in rural India, right? So how can we reach out to them?
Probably, can I answer that? Probably that's why we said NGOs should come into play. The other people should take it to the, there are the legal service authority. There's so many other, people who can take the law, interpret, tell them. And also the government should take up, whichever government it is should take up as an issue. We have the Judicial Academy where, we also, call all these people, then give them these lectures. So like that, it has to be spread to the, so that common man, the police, everybody understands as to what the court courts ultimately say or the law says. So that's where the legal awareness campaign should be taken up very seriously. Yeah. Next question. Next row. Anybody? Yeah, she. Yeah.
Alok, my question is to Badr Sayeed ma'am and Abhijit. You mentioned sex change operations, but in Iran, isn't it true that rather homosexuals are comfortable being what they are and liking a person of the same sex, and often saying sex change is not even a necessity. They are comfortable being women and liking women. So is that always a solution?
Quick answer, no. They're not cool with that. They allow it a lot, but they're not cool with it. But if you sex change and you marry your ex-girlfriend, then they're cool with it. But it has to be between man and woman. Not what they were born with, but what they choose to be. Yeah.
So we said we'll go row by row, so you get the priority.
Probably you might have heard about an incident in Visakhapatnam where a Navy sailor has been sacked for undergoing sex change. Will there be a rule of law? Just because he or she, whatever you call the person, yes, he has become incapable just because the person has undergone a sex change. How does the law deal with that? Is it legally right, or is it, or the defense sector has to make certain changes in its policies?
I don't think it can be retrospectively applied, can it? Because if tomorrow if a legislation comes out saying that you can't sack people for a sex change operation, it can't be retrospectively applied.
See, like no penal law can be given retrospective. Any beneficial provisions can be given retrospective effect. But if it is going to have an adverse effect on a person, obviously it can't be given retrospective effect. Yes, because he can always enforce the law through if the department does it, fine. Otherwise, he has to go before the court of law and ensure that he gets back the right. Yes, but you know, at a point of time, if it is something what he has done amounts to a criminal act, then that stays. But this doesn't seem to be what you're saying. It's not a criminal act. Because of his change in the sex, he was removed, became incapable. The remedy lies before the court of law. He can always go. Article 14 and other things where you can always claim, yes.
I don't even know where the illegality in that is, because that's like claiming a woman isn't...
That itself will be illegal. The removal of a person would itself be, so maybe he should have, we don't know.
Because the only thing a woman is not capable of doing in a modern military is extreme physical, bare extreme physical loads. Other than that, the mindset, everything else is exactly the same.
And also
it's only the physiognomical difference.
Yes, and also what the courts have ruled is, if you, for some reason, if you become incapable of doing what you were doing earlier, you will be retained the job in something else which you'll be able to do. So that's also there. Anyway, next question.
Yeah, sir, this is a question for you. So in triple talaq, the legislature has stepped in spite of, after the Supreme Court verdict. But for Section 377, we had a window after the Supreme Court judgment. We in fact, after the Delhi High Court, we had the entire UPA 2, and then after the Supreme Court judgment. But neither the previous dispensation nor the current legislature or the current government has brought in a law. And then the legislature, has left it to the judiciary. So why?
Now the decision will be left to the judiciary. That's what the government has said. But the judiciary could decide, yes, what is appropriate for the government to do, to pass a law in those terms, amend the law, whatever else to decriminalize the section. So that's what is likely to happen, because the judgment has not come as yet. So once the judgment comes, most likely, obviously it will decriminalize the whole thing, but then it will probably ask the government to pass a law on those lines. That's how it's probably going to happen.
Hello, my name is Bishwarupa Kaur and I study in the Sri Aurobindo ashram. My question was about going beyond 377 to Justice Jaichandren sir. So as you said, how do you bring down this to the people and how do you make them aware that this has been decriminalized? So even then, I feel that the problem still remains in society because people's mindsets aren't changing. So my question was that can the court or the government take any measures to change that in a society's level?
See, it's basically the responsibility of the government to enforce laws, especially where there are various aspects. The NGOs are there, which can do that. Then there are the Legal Services Authority Act is there, where they are. In fact, I was in charge of the Legal Service Authority here in Pondicherry for some time. So we can go to the villages, we have paralegal volunteers, train them in this, send them to the villages, distribute pamphlets, advertise in televisions, so many things that can be, done to, for the message to reach the people. That's how, because most people are illiterate in the villages, even in the cities, to know these intricate laws, it's going to be difficult. Imagine somebody in a village to know what exactly the letter of the law, the spirit of the law says. So it's a hard task, but then it has to be done probably by the NGOs, and the government has to do it, the courts have to do it in its own way. Probably that's how it has to be done. And youngsters like you can do that as well. Yeah.
Can I just add one word? Maybe we can amend that Special Marriage Act and say that, 2 men or 2 women, whatever, anybody can get married under that law. It doesn't have to be, we don't have to say just men and women. Special Marriage Act to be amended. I'm just asking the judge.
Maybe,
I don't know.
In Pondi Lit Festival number 2, chapter 2, whenever that comes, probably we'll have that as a subject, because there's an interesting subject, because now living in together is another issue which is cropping up. Some courts are saying if you're living in substantially for a long time, you will be taken to be, presumed to be husband and wife. And all the other legal, liabilities and rights flow out of it. So these are, of course, beyond triple talaq and all that. It's an excellent thing that you said. But then probably when we meet next, we'll be able to discuss that in detail. Anybody else? One more? Now we can ask you questions. You've been very attentive and...
Just the last thing, because just to synthesize whatever I have heard here. One thing, I start with 377 Abhijit and Smita. The thing is, when we talk about a lot of questions came up, like awareness, this, that. Our society in itself is so fragmented and all. At this point of time, I see the homosexuality is a very urban concept. I just want to understand from you, do you even have data? Are there cases where there are homosexuals apart from the unit, like we have the Hijra community, which is all encompassing villages, and then they come for festivals and all this rituals. Apart from that, and it is a taboo in its own way. The homosexuality as we see it in urban spaces, is it even has it even permeated across society?
So this was kind of linked to your question. So the funny thing is, I've not studied this specifically, but I did a year's worth of work in around Bastar and the Naxal area, which was very rural and tribal. There's no conception of being a homosexual out there. It's not something you can, apparently you can only be gay if you know what that word means, in a sense, what it implies and so on and so forth. There are people that I know who in those areas who feel exclusively attracted only to men. They are married and they lead, unlike urban guys who know they're gay and torture their wives, destroy their kids' lives and everything else. Here it's a completely much freer dynamic that I've seen, at least in the areas that I know in Madhya Pradesh and Andhra that are Naxal affected, where they don't know what being homosexual is, they don't know what being gay is, they're married with a wife, they have kids, they all seem quite happy. I mean, I don't know the exact, maybe there's some hidden trouble out there, it didn't appear to me, and they were quite happy bonking boys on the side. So, I mean, I don't even know how you begin to conduct a study like that, you know, because you don't want to destroy a society like that saying, are you gay? Are you now feeling like this is what liberals go around doing, you know? They'll find a victim, even if you're not a victim, they'll find some way of making a victim out of you because it's a business for them. So I don't believe in, you know, monetizing victimhood and going there and projecting something that probably, because the mental construct doesn't exist.
So, coming to a close of the session, we thank our panelists, Mr. Abhijit, Mrs. Smita, and Mrs. Bada Sayeed, and all of you who have taken the interest and trouble in coming here. And this is the start, as we said. Hopefully, there'll be more of these literary festivals where many more issues, more controversial issues can also be discussed, and probably that will happen soon. So we thank all of you for participating in this very actively. Just one thing before we close. One of our ladies there, she asked, how do we see, there was this Namakkal district which I was in charge of as a portfolio judge at one point of time. HIV, it was #1 HIV district in the state. That because number of highways were passing by, and then truck drivers, where they started spreading to the college students. We took up this issue. We had the district collectors, the SPs, the doctors, the NGOs like Rotary Club. We involved all of them. We had number of meetings. We discussed with college students. We adopted villages. We had flag marches. We had ambulances. Vans, distributing pamphlets and things like that. In 2 years' time, this is what the judicial people did through the Legal Service Authority. In 2 years' time, it came down to #3. Karur and Theni were leading. So it's possible. So to spread the awareness, we are saying, and to make a difference. Thank you very much.